a single coffee stain, and a message someone tried to erase. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're listening from. Your comments turn this community into something truly special. I always love reading them. Let's begin. It started with a letter, which is unusual for us. Not that people don't send Wolfe notes, but usually the letters are typed, apologetic, and begging for an appointment we're just as likely to ignore as honor. This one was different. For starters, it came in an ivory envelope, hand-delivered by a kid who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else than standing at our door with my raised eyebrow drilling through him. The handwriting on the outside was firm, dark, and old-fashioned, the kind you see in law offices and wills that decide which cousin gets the silver. Inside was a single sheet of stationery with a blot at the top right corner. Coffee, by the looks of it. A nice dramatic effect, even if unintended. The note was short. Mr. Wolfe, I request your discretion in a matter that concerns not only money, but dignity. Please allow me the courtesy of an audience at your earliest convenience. Gideon Vance. No explanation, no promise of fat fees, no hint of what made dignity the price tag on the package. Just the name and the blotch. I read it twice, then carried it back to Wolfe, who was mid-morning settled into his chair like a monarch whose throne had grown roots. The beer stood chilled on the stand at his elbow. Orchids waited upstairs, but Fritz had bribed him down with a plate of sausage and eggs that could have kept a lumberjack upright for 2 days. I handed him the letter without comment. Wolfe has a way of glaring at paper as though it personally offends him for existing. He took longer than necessary, sniffed at the coffee stain as though it had murdered someone, and finally lifted those eyebrows of his just enough to register interest. A smudge, he muttered. Coffee, I'd say. Carelessness, he corrected, but one that compels. He let the letter rest on his stomach and shut his eyes, which is the closest thing to running laps you'll ever catch him doing. I asked the obvious. Should I tell Vance he's welcome, or toss this into the bin with the offers to expose politicians' mistresses? Wolfe opened one eye. Invite him. 3 o'clock. The man is deliberate enough to blot stationery. Let us see if he is equally deliberate with speech. That was that. At 3 on the dot, the front bell rang with a sort of insistence you associate with men used to getting their way. Gideon Vance was tall, sharp-nosed, with the look of a banker who'd spent years teaching other people to doubt themselves. His suit was sober gray, his tie knotted like it had been born that way, and his eyes shifted just once around the office before fixing themselves on Wolfe. I got the impression he catalogued me and the furniture in the same glance, and filed, both under temporary, "You received my note," he said. His voice was low, deliberate, almost careful to the point of condescension. Wolfe gestured with a finger at the red leather chair. Sit. Speak. Vance sat, but he didn't speak immediately. He placed a folded paper on Wolfe's desk, precisely aligned with the blotter. The same handwriting. A fresh page. I couldn't help notice. Another faint brown mark at the edge, as though his pen and coffee cup had struck up a habit. This concerns a letter, Vance said finally. A letter that has gone astray. Its content is of no monetary worth, but of immense personal consequence. I need it recovered before it finds its way into hands eager to wound me. And why me? Wolfe asked, the words more sigh than sound. Because, Vance leaned forward, the person who may hold it would never part with it under threat. Only precision, patience, and a certain detachment could pry it free. Your reputation suggests you have those qualities. I had to bite back a grin. Detachment was one way to describe Wolfe. I could think of others less flattering, but they wouldn't get me my paycheck. Wolfe flicked his eyes toward me. That was the signal. Dig. He'd decided to entertain Vance's puzzle, stain and all, and just like that, the brownstone had its tranquility cracked by a man with a blot on his conscience and on his stationery. Vance didn't waste time with flattery. He took a slow breath the way men do when they've spent years teaching their faces to be furniture, and said, "The letter was written to a woman named Camilla Ives. She was a finalist for the Vance Fellowship in 2017. I believed she had compromised herself to advance. I voted against her. Years later, I learned I had been misled. I drafted an apology, with an offer to make the wrong right. I did not send it. I kept it in my inner safe to reconsider, I asked, and then it grew wings. It vanished 3 weeks ago," he said. "There was no forced entry. Only 2 people know the combination besides me. My partner, Regina Pell, and my confidential secretary, Moira Dwyer." Wolfe's eyelids lifted a millimeter. "You kept an unsigned mea culpa in a safe and gave 2 others the means to retrieve it. Why?" "Because," Vance said, each syllable ironed flat, "we run a foundation, not a spy ring. Trust is a condition of function," I made a note. "Trust is nice. Locks are cheaper." Wolfe stretched a finger toward the stained page on his belly. "Why is the coffee stain important?" "Mr. Goodwin tells me the blot on your note is not unique." Vance looked irritated that his penmanship had been frisked. "Because the missing letter, before it went missing, did not have one. I'm fastidious. The stain appeared on a second page I left as a decoy in the safe after the first was taken. That decoy was returned to me on my desk last Thursday morning. It had a brown ring on the upper right corner." He glanced at our carpet like he'd discovered we were the kind of people who let flaws happen. "Someone is toying. So you wrote one letter, it disappears. You plant a decoy to see who bites, and the decoy returns with a coffee halo." I leaned back. What did the disappearance buy them? Cash, leverage, a social scalp? "I do not know yet," he said. "There have been no demands. Only currents. Rumor positioned to break if nudged the board," I guessed. "The trustees convene in 5 days," he said. "There is to be a renewal of my term as chair. If the letter, or its paraphrase, surfaces, what I intended as a private redress will be framed as past corruption. Regina wants the chair. My daughter would prefer I lose it. A certain attorney believes I am too discretionary with mercy. And Camilla, if she learns of the letter without context, may decide to display it at the gala like a pelt." He smoothed his tie once, which is what passes for agitation among men who grew up being shushed by paneling. "I want it recovered without spectacle." "Names," Wolfe said, "with exact relationships." "Spare me adjectives. Regina Pell, co-trustee and partner. We disagree without theatrics, but she wants my seat. Moira Dwyer, my secretary. She administers my day and my disorder. Lyle Heron, counsel to the foundation, a reformer by vocation. Ivy Vance, my daughter. She writes essays about institutions and their hypocrisies. Evan Malloy, her fiancé, a photographer, and impressionable. Anyone else who might set a cup on the right edge of your paper?" I asked. Vance actually turned to me, measuring whether cheek would be an ongoing problem. "The building has a lobby cafe. Staff frequent it. So do I at times. But my office coffee is brought in by Miss Dwyer. Usually." His mouth thinned. "She drinks it sweet. You could smell a bakery when she's working late." The doorbell rang with a sting that said the city had found us. I went and found a brunette in a navy coat, holding a folder like it had committed a crime. She had the efficient look of people who believe clocks have feelings. "Moira Dwyer," she said, not asking but identifying the only person in the hallway who looked like an Archie. "Mr. Vance called. He said to bring the appointment log and the access records." "Of course he did," I told her, and led her in. If the brownstone is a monastery, guests are pilgrims who forgot their sandals. She took in the office the way a good secretary takes in a waiting room. Shelf first, chair second, the real power third. Wolfe had not moved. He seldom does, but this time he added the audible layer of not moving. "Miss Dwyer," he said, "put the folder on the desk and sit where you will not twitch." She sat. She did not twitch much. Up close, she was fresh-faced but tired-eyed. Late 20s, the kind of precise that's grown on a stem of worry. The faint, sugar smell Vance had promised rode in with her. "You've been with Mr. Vance how long?" I asked. 4 years. She looked at the folder, not me. He prefers paper backups. "We keep logs of safe access, not just the combination." He's old-fashioned about acknowledgements. "Who had the safe that day?" Wolfe asked. "Regina opened it after lunch to retrieve donor files for the October meeting. Mr. Vance opened it at 5. I opened it at 7 to put back the draft after he told me not to send it." "Which draft?" Wolfe's voice was silk over wire. "The apology," she said quietly. "I typed it for him." He dictated. She glanced at Vance with something like loyalty and defiance learning to share a chair. He changed his mind about sending it. He said he would reconsider in the morning. The next morning it wasn't there. "And the decoy," I said. "I typed that too." On his instruction, now her eyes were on Wolfe, because when you have to tell a stranger you helped bait a fish hook in your boss's pond, you pick the stranger who looks least inclined to stand up. He wanted to know if anyone would touch it. I put it in the safe. 2 days later, I found it on his desk when I came in, with a cup mark on the top right. "Not ours." "How do you know?" Wolfe asked. "I don't mark paper with cups," she said, with a flash of professional offense that made me like her. "And Mr. Vance doesn't drink at his desk. Regina carries water. Lyle doesn't put anything down unless it's a statute. Ivy," she paused, "isn't allowed in the office without an escort." "Delightful," I said. Wolfe closed his eyes. When you watch Wolfe think, you understand why turtles outlive storms. "Mr. Vance," he said, "the content of the letter." Vance hesitated a breath too long. Wolfe made a sound somewhere between a rumble and grammar. "You will not hire me to retrieve the consequences of a secret you hoard from me. I do not pursue shadows I am forbidden to illuminate." "It says," Vance said evenly, "that I relied on a report I did not verify. That a board member implied Camilla Ives traded intimacy for advantage. I refused her funding. I later learned the rumor originated with a person who wished to defeat her for reasons unrelated to merit. The letter apologizes and offers a private grant from my personal funds to support her work." "Name of the originator?" I asked. Vance's jaw worked. "No." "Then you've hired the wrong furniture," I told him. He shut his eyes once, like a man agreeing to a tooth extraction because the violinist says it will be quick. "Regina." Miss Dwyer looked at her knees, then at him, and stayed quiet. Wolfe opened his eyes and let them rest on the stained corner of the first letter again. "Good. Mr. Goodwin will obtain the schedules of all 5 persons you named for the next 3 days. He will visit them. He will be courteous. And he will be inexorable. You will not warn them. You will surrender copies of every access log and any drafts. Miss Dwyer, you will remain available." That includes tonight. Vance rose as if the chair had become briefly ashamed of his weight. "Discretion, Mr. Wolfe." "I am a sphinx," Wolfe said. "Mr. Goodwin is merely garrulous." The bell rang again. This time it came with a voice I could hear through the door, female, impatient, and entirely certain that patience was a tax paid by other people. When I opened it, Ivy Vance had already decided she wasn't going to like me. She had the Vance eyes, colder and brighter, and the kind of leather jacket that looks like a manifesto. "Is my father here?" she asked, and stepped past me without waiting for the tour. The brownstone doesn't like being used as a hallway. You could feel it in the air. The orchids upstairs folded their little arms. Wolfe did not rise, but his eyebrows made clear that geography had been breached. "Hello, Ivy," Vance said, and didn't bother to add anything useless like please don't. She looked at Moira, at the folder, at Wolfe, at me, and put it together like a reporter rearranging the last paragraph. "So," she said, "you're buying yourself a cleaner." "Miss Vance," Wolfe murmured, "your father is purchasing clarity. Whether it polishes or tarnishes depends on the metal. Save the epigrams for people who don't know you," she said, and then, to me, "If he's paying you to chase a piece of paper, you should start at Heron's office, or at Regina's, or at the cafe on the ground floor where Moira mainlined syrup." Moira flushed. Vance's mouth thinned again. Wolfe, who never drinks coffee, lifted the stained page delicately by its corner and observed the ring a second time. "The top right," he said, almost to himself. "Not a writer's ring, a reader's. A small table, a cup set down by someone facing the person who held the page, not the page's owner. Mr. Goodwin, begin with the cafe." He let the paper fall back, a ragged little planet with an orbit. "And bring me, if you please, a sample of their cups." The cafe in Vance's building was one of those polite lobbies that thinks a fern can make you forgive marble. The counter was brushed steel, and the barista had a haircut that meant she could pour a rosetta with her eyes closed and still judge your shoes. I ordered 3 different sizes to go, 12, 16, and an espresso demitasse they swore only left the premises on parole, and watched how the cups lived when they thought no one cared. The paper ones had a vertical seam that broke the ring if you set them down with enthusiasm. The ceramic left a fat, even halo. I took a table by the window and made rings on a page from my notebook like a schoolboy learning circles, then asked for lids and napkins and the manager's last ounce of patience. "Research," I told her. "On coffee?" she asked. "On circles," I said, and gave her a smile that has sold worse stories. Names were easy. I described the suspects the way people do when they aren't sure they're suspects, and the barista, Kasia, a Polish vowel with sharp elbows, filled in the drinks like she was calling a roll. Regina Pell, water, sometimes English breakfast, ceramic, never sets anything on paper because she's the type that taps coasters into alignment. Moira Dwyer, caramel latte, 2 pumps, paper, straw if she's nervous, and if she's late, she sets the cup down and forgets it because the phone rings. Lyle Heron, Americano, black, ceramic, left hand, and he tucks the sleeve of his suit under when he reaches, like he learned manners from a tailor. Ivy Vance, cold brew in a glass when she's writing, double espresso in a paper cup when she's performing. Evan Malloy, cappuccino, to go, camera strap on, sets cups down like they're part of the shot. "Does Mr. Vance come down?" I asked. "Sometimes," Kasia said. "He takes drip in a ceramic, no sugar, and never stays." "Anyone bring coffee up for someone else?" I said, as a kindness or a habit. "Moira does," she said immediately. "She carries 2 at once like a waitress, paper, no tray. Evan brings Ivy's when she's mid-rant. Regina doesn't carry anything that might spill. And Heron, he doesn't fetch. He receives." I left a tip as generous as my curiosity, and took the cups and a quarter stack of their napkins back to the brownstone, where Fritz looked at my haul like I'd proposed we replace the wine cellar with a soda fountain. Wolfe, who does not drink coffee on principle and on palate, extended a finger at the 12-ounce paper and said, "That." The decoy page Vance had brought was in an envelope. Wolfe slid it out and turned it under the light. The ring on the upper right had a clean break at what would be 2 o'clock if the circle were a clock, and a faint stipple on the outer edge, tiny flecks where the pulp had lifted. He nodded once as if conceding the universe had, this time, assembled a simple machine. "Water," he said. I dipped the bottom of the 12 into a saucer, shook it once to leave a thin bead and set it down hard on clean paper. The ring it made had a nick where the seam interrupted the curve like a thought interrupting itself. Wolfe brought the stained decoy close, sniffed without actually letting it touch his nose. Pride is a strange animal, and then used a magnifier he keeps for orchids and lies. The seam gap is at the same relative position, he said, and the stipple is not sugar. It is the raised fiber from cheap stock abraded by moisture. The cafe's cups, not office porcelain, which says someone didn't just put a cup down in a hurry, I said. They put down a to-go cup from downstairs. Not Mr. Vance, who doesn't drink at his desk. Not Regina, who's allergic to spills. Not Heron, who carries ceramic and treats liquids. Like depositions. That leaves Moira, Ivy, or Evan Wolfe closed his eyes. Miss Dwyer would not mark paper. Her professional vanity would revolt, and she protested credibly. Miss Vance is denied access, absent escort. Denial is porous, but it is a datum. Mr. Malloy is not on staff, but enjoys adjacency. Which of them sits opposite Mr. Vance and sets a cup down on his right? Someone across from him, I said. A visitor. Cup to their left, reaching across the desk toward the top right of the page as he's reading. If they're right-handed, the cup lands on their right. If they're left-handed, on their left, which gets us nowhere until we know who signs with what. Begin to know, he said. But first, the building. I phoned the foundation and asked for the facilities office like I had a leak in my credenza. The manager, one of those men whose voice tells you he's a retired sergeant policing thermostats, agreed to let me glance at the lobby camera if I promised not to teach anyone new tricks. 10 minutes later, I was in front of a monitor that showed more shoes than a chorus line. The night before the decoy reappeared, at 7:42 p.m., the camera caught Moira going out with 2 paper cups and coming back with none. At 8:03, Evan passed through with a cup, camera on his shoulder, and at 8:25, Ivy stalked the marble like it owed her money. Empty-handed, but fast. Closes at 9, the sergeant said. We hate the last hour. People think their evenings are emergencies. Any late visitors that night? I asked. Heron left at 7, Regina at 6:30, Mr. Vance at 8:57 with nothing in his hands. Cleaning crew? After 9:30, and they don't touch desks. I went up to the office on the pretense of returning the access logs Moira had brought. She took them with thanks that tried and failed to not ask questions. I wandered to Mr. Vance's door and looked at his desk. The top right corner had a felt blotter precisely edged, a pen stand, and a little brass tray for paper clips. I leaned to the level of the surface and used a small flashlight. People think I carry it for shadows. Sometimes it's for smudges. There was a faint crescent of dried tan right where the decoy's ring would have sat. Not much, just enough to tell me it had been a wet set-down and not a theatrical dab. It trailed in a thin tail toward the center, as if the cup had been lifted and a last drop skated after it. I sniffed. If there was vanilla, it had died with dignity. Coffee, plain, no syrup. That didn't acquit anyone. Even caramel people order plain when they're pretending to be serious. Looking for something? The voice belonged to Lyle Heron, who had a jaw like a plumb line and a smile that wanted to be a verdict. He was in shirt sleeves, and the left cuff was faintly ink-dusted. Checking if this desk ever looks untidy, I said. It doesn't, he said. In law, we differentiate between chaos and evidence. Mr. Vance prefers neither left hand, I said. He looked at me. It does 1/3 of the work. Ceramic, I said. The only civilized container, he said. If you're itemizing my vices, you'll need more paper. He didn't ask why I was there. Men like Heron let other people create their own perjury. I left him to his tidy principles and took a slow route past the cafe again. Evan sat by the fern, cup at elbow, flipping through shots on his camera. They were good, which is sometimes unfortunate. Ivy came in as I watched and took his cup without asking, drank, grimaced, and put it down on the table at the top right of his stack of prints. I asked her, "You always borrow, or just from men who love you?" She looked up. You're the one Dad hired to fetch a ghost. How's that working out? So far, your father's ghost drinks medium roast, I said. Did you go into his office the night before the decoy walked? I don't go where I'm not wanted, she said, which, from a certain temperament, can mean I live there. Ask Heron what he wants. Ask Regina what she deserves. Ask Moira what she's guilty about. About what? Being loyal to the wrong men, she said, and lifted the cup again, this time setting it down nearer the top right of her folder as if the angle were a habit. She's right-handed. Evan's left when he shoots, right when he drinks. That told me more about pose than guilt, but it told me. Back at the brownstone, I laid out the cups in my ring practice and reported the lobby tape. Wolfe listened without moving except for the eyebrow that thanks you when you haven't wasted too much oxygen. He had Fritz bring a shallow dish, and he had me wet the demitasse, the ceramic, and the paper again and again until the paper delivered 3 rings with gaps that could be laid on the decoy like scales on a fish. Paper, he said. Café. Evening. Not Mr. Vance. Not Miss Pell. Mr. Heron prefers ceramic and has hands that would not put a cup on a client's paper. Miss Dwyer would restrain herself. Her vanity is a governor. Miss Vance is adept at trespass, but denied by policy. Mr. Malloy circulates unpoliced. He opened his eyes. We will not yet accuse. We will disturb. Where first? I asked. Regina Pell, he said. Her order is water. A person who does not drink near paper still spills in other ways. Ask her why she warned Mr. Vance against Miss Ives and why she would prefer the apology not exist. And Mr. Goodwin, note where she places her glass. Regina Pell kept an office like a balanced checkbook. The door glass said her name in modest letters, and inside the carpet had no opinion. The art was rectangular, and the desk had exactly 3 objects, a blotter, a pen stand, and a glass coaster centered as if by surveyor. She was tall without being long, early 50s, the kind of precise that makes a tailor feel seen. When she gestured me to a chair, the gesture included the chair and the distance between us and whatever story I'd brought. You're Mr. Goodwin, she said, as if verifying a dosage. Gideon warned me you'd appear. He didn't say you'd be punctual. I'm paid by the hour, I said. You're paid by the quarter. Her mouth twitched and then behaved. What would you like to know that you haven't decided already? Why you told Vance 6 years ago that Camilla Ives didn't qualify for Saint's Day. I told him the file was incomplete and the references were contaminated, she said. That is not a lynching. That is fiduciary duty. A prominent donor intimated improprieties. I advised caution. Gideon executed judgment. In a foundation, you avoid both scandal and the appearance of using money to absolve it. Names, I said. Not without counsel present, she said. And we're not in litigation. Yet her water arrived by way of a silent assistant and landed on the coaster with a tiny chime. She placed it with 2 fingers, and then, when I put my notebook on the desk corner out of politeness, she slid the glass an inch farther from paper. I watched the habit without blinking at it. She caught me and chose not to mind. You haven't asked the right question, she said. I'm collecting them. Why would you prefer the apology letter not exist? Because it converts a historical decision into a present liability, she said, and the words were smooth enough to have passed a board vote already. If Gideon made an error, then we redress by process now, not by a private check written as penance. The optics are poison. Heron agrees. You and Mr. Heron always agree? We agree when the law and the mission align, she said. On other topics, we improvise. You knew about the apology, I said. I knew about the impulse, she corrected. Moira told me he dictated a draft. I told Moira to log it like any sensitive document and return it to the safe if he changed his mind, which she did. If it then grew legs, you should ask who loosens bolts around here. Who loosens bolts? I asked. People with time at night and a belief in their own necessity, she said. Evan has a building pass because he photographs our events. Ivy has moral access because she announces it. Heron has keys because he's counsel. I don't take coffee on paper, and I don't touch safes without another person present. This, she tapped the coaster lightly, is not posturing. It's practice. I slid a foundation memo toward her so it sat half an inch beneath the glass. She took the glass off the coaster, moved the coaster, and put the glass down again with the memo excluded. It was neat as a card trick. If she'd ever set a ring on a page, it had died of loneliness. Who would benefit from a private apology going public? I said. Besides the daughter who has built a readership on the betrayal of institutions, Regina said. Besides the fiancé who wants a portfolio that burns. Besides counsel who believes daylight is an antiseptic that cures reputational infections by cutting off the limb. Choose any. I prefer no one benefit. Why did you float the rumor in 2017? I asked. She didn't blink. I didn't. I reported a donor's statement. I warned Gideon not to rely on gossip. He believed what he needed to believe to keep the air clear. If he regrets, he can propose a process to amend the record. He does not get to rewrite it in his study after hours. You wanted his chair then, I said. I want the foundation to outlive us, she said, and that landed with enough weight to leave a mark if she'd been the cup type. If the board thinks I should steer for a while, I won't cry. I also won't manufacture theatrics to earn it. Ask me again after your ghost is back in the safe. Moira's head appeared in the doorway and backed out when she saw Regina already had company. I excused myself without promising not to return and caught Moira by the elevator. She's not the spill-on-paper type, I said. She irons her envelopes, Moira said. If you're looking for smudges, try human ones. What did you tell her about the apology? I asked. That you'd been retained, she said, and then bit her lip at having said retained about me. And that Mr. Vance would likely reconsider by morning. Did you ever take coffee into his office at night? Yes, she said, if we're working late. But I don't set it on papers. He hates that. I put it on the little brass tray if I must. Sometimes Evan comes by with Ivy. If she's in a mood, she'll pace and pick things up and mislay them emotionally. He, at least, is careful with his elbows. Yet the decoy returned with a ring, I said. She winced. I know what that looks like. It wasn't me. The elevator opened on Heron, who gave us both a nod as if we were clauses in a contract he intended to define later. He carried a ceramic mug from somewhere that thinks logos are a virtue. Left hand, no lid. He didn't even look at the elevator's steel walls as a hazard. I let him ride alone. Ivy was at the lobby's far end talking a security guard into pretending rules are interpretive dance. She saw me and came over with the clip of someone who auditions each step for intent. Did Regina hand you a sermon about optics? She said. She did, I said. She also claims you're auditioning for Greek chorus. That's generous. I'm the person who will say the line no one else will, she said. My father let a whisper cost a woman her work. If he wants to make it right, he should make it right in public, with a check large enough to be called an admission. And you'd prefer that happen the week the board votes his chair. I would prefer it happen the week truth is possible, she said. If that's this week, wonderful. If it rearranges the furniture, we'll sit on the floor. Where were you the night the decoy took a walk? At a reading in Brooklyn until 8, she said. Then I came here because Evan wanted to light the foyer for a portrait. We weren't in Dad's office. We were in the gallery. Ask the janitor who hates me. What about the cafe? I stole Evan's espresso and put it on his prints, she said, unembarrassed. On the top right, if you're cataloging my sins. He scowled, and I told him it was texture. You ever borrow Moira's keys? I said. She smiled. She's not that kind of loyal. On my way out, I stopped at facilities again and asked my sergeant friend for a look at the floor camera on Vance's corridor. The footage showed what you would expect. Cleaners after 9:30 with carts that minded their manners. But at 8:11, a shadow passed that door frame, paused, and then went on. The angle was bad. You could make it Evan or a coat rack on vacation. At 8:16, Moira went by with a folder and no cups. At 8:20, she came back with her hands empty. If someone had moved the decoy, they had done it in the realm where a pause can be a theft or a thought. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had not budged from his coordinates. I set the day on his desk like a tray. Regina's coaster habits, Moira's answer, Ivy's appetite for truth with garnish, Evan as a silhouette with caffeine, Heron in ceramic. I added the corridor pause for flavor. Regina does not stain paper, I said. She stains with sentences. Moira swears by trays. Ivy admits to assaulting prints, not letters. Heron carries ceramic like a sacrament. Evan is ambulatory evidence with a cup. Wolfe made the small sound that means not bad for walking. And the apology? She thinks it's a liability if it exists in private, I said. Heron agrees. Moira logged it. Everyone knows it existed. No one knows where it is. Someone knows, Wolfe said. He or she returned a decoy to assert knowledge and to unnerve. That is not theft, that is arrangement. It signals, I can stage your desk. Evan stages things, I said. Ivy stages arguments. Heron stages cases. Regina stages boards. Moira stages appointments. Good, Wolfe said. Now we stage them. He had me telephone each of them and deliver a version of the truth designed to itch. To Regina, that Gideon intended to speak with Camilla Ives before the vote. To Heron, that I would need his opinion on the legal risk if a private apology were read aloud at the gala. To Ivy, that we had traced the ring to the cafe and would be examining the camera by the gallery. To Evan, that we admired his lighting and would like to see his frames from the night in question because they might incidentally show a door. To Moira, that Mr. Wolfe required every draft, envelope and carbon involving the letter in person tonight. Why tonight? I asked. Because a trespass is more useful when invited, he said, and let his eyes close. And because the person who toys is a person who cannot resist a change to the board. Evening is when the brownstone remembers it's a monastery, which makes a doorbell feel like a cough in church. At 7:30, Moira arrived first, clutching a craft envelope like it was radioactive and a paper cup like it was absolution. She hesitated at the threshold, clocked the carpets and the desk and Wolfe's bulk with the same careful inventory she applies to an inbox, and lifted the cup a half-inch as if to ask permission of gravity. Not on paper, I said. Not anywhere near Mr. Wolfe, she said, and crossed to the side table under the window to park it on the polished wood, far from temptation. The envelope came to me. I checked the flap. She had sealed it shut, then taped it for luck, and written across the seam in a neat hand, drafts, apology, and decoy. Wolfe extended 2 fingers, and I slit it. Carbon copies, 2 onion skins, an envelope addressed to Camilla Ives, and a yellow pad with 3 lines of dictation notes in Vance's clipped tone. No coffee moons, no theatrical bruises. Wolfe weighed the carbons in his palm the way some men weigh fruit, then set them on his blotter, and told Moira to sit where the chair would not squeak. Before she could, the bell rang again. Evan floated in with a camera and the hummingbird energy of people who think light is improvable and time is a tool. He had a white paper cup with a cardboard sleeve and a smirk that apologized in advance. I steered the cup to the side table with its cousin while he unloaded prints. Foyer shots from the night of the decoy's return, a few test frames from the gallery, a corridor angle that caught the shine of Vance's door hardware, and not much else. They were composed to within an inch of their lives. In one reflection in a black-framed glass piece, I could see the corridor in miniature, distorted by the bevel. It showed motion, someone's shoulder, the line of a collar, more shadow than identity. Texture, Evan said, happy with himself. Blur, I said. Less so. Moira leaned forward, not for the art, but for the memory, and pointed. That was around 8. I was going back and forth. If I paused, it was because Lyle said he'd left a draft with a note and I didn't want to misplace anything. Heron left a draft, I said. A memo about disclosure protocols, she said, wincing at how it sounded in the wild. Not the apology. He thinks I should have logged the apology in a confidential annex, not the main book, as if annexes prevent theft. The third bell came with a jacket. Ivy entered without bothering to be shown, hands empty but eyes loaded. She gave the cups on the side table a once-over that didn't improve their character and flicked a glance at the carbons on Wolfe's desk. "So this is where dignity is triaged," she said, and took a chair without asking who owned it. Evan made a soothing noise, which she ignored. Moira stayed quiet, which looked like work. Wolfe didn't move except to breathe, which he does in paragraphs. "Miss Vance," he said, "your father's affairs are not surgical exhibits." "They are when the patient refuses anesthesia," she said. "Your metaphor is cheap," he murmured, and let it die. He tilted the carbons an inch and watched a corner catch the light. "Mr. Goodwin." A notepad, I handed him mine. He laid the top carbon over a clean page and ran the pad under the lamp, bringing the surface almost parallel with the light. He has lamps that make light do tricks it didn't intend when it woke up. Faint impressions appeared on my page. The carbon had kissed it. He examined the ghost of the apology words, not for content, he already had that, but for pressure. "Dictation," he said, "not freehand." The keys struck like an orderly footfall. "Miss Dwyer, your work?" Moira nodded, relieved to be identified with something simple. "Now," he said, and turned his head toward the window. "The cups." I don't argue when Wolfe calls on tableware. On the side table were their 2 white lives, sweating slightly in the room's warm quiet. Moira's was a 12 with a seam you could find by fingertip. Evan had gone 16, sleeve printed with a tasteful fern like it could cleanse conscience. I lifted them both and checked for weight. Moira's was a quarter full. Evan's was a swallow from empty. I set them back down because Fritz was visible in the doorway with his own opinion wearing a dish towel. "We do not," Fritz said to the room in general, "ring the desks of this house with coffee." "No," Wolfe said. "We allow it to perform." Ivy, who never misses a stage, leaned to peer at a print. "He's going to tell you which cup did the ring in Dad's office by smelling paper," she murmured to Evan. "He's going to tell us who uses habit as handwriting," Wolfe said, and looked at her. "Do you?" She flashed the smile that breaks cameras. "If habit is handwriting, mine is legible." "So," he said, "show us how you place your cup when you cannot be bothered to think." "On that folder. Mr. Goodwin, clean sheet." She rolled her eyes but complied, taking Evan's cup without asking him and setting it on the top right corner of a manila folder on the side table, where the sleeve left its little fern imprimatur and the seam gap landed at roughly 2 o'clock. She did it without drama, which is when you should watch hands. "Miss Dwyer," Wolfe said without turning, "would you, in a moment of fatigue, place your cup near a document?" "I wouldn't," she said. "You wouldn't," he agreed, "but do so now." She used her left to move the folder away from the edge and set her cup further back, as if distance were a superstition. The ring she drew when I damped the base, for science, had the seam break at 4 o'clock. Evan, with the curiosity of people who like to see their bodies make marks, took his turn and set his cup down at the top right, like it was choreography he liked. 2 o'clock again. "Good," Wolfe said. "Now do it thoughtlessly." He looked at Ivy. "Speak to Mr. Malloy about your day and set the cup while you are busy liking your words." She did, talking about a piece she was writing where the antagonist was a benevolent policy, and her cup drifted the way a true habit drifts. Reached for, set, nudged. 2 o'clock. Evan's hand, when he gestured, brushed it and resettled it without looking. 2 o'clock. Moira, when I asked her something about the access log, moved hers to clear space. 4 o'clock. You could sell tickets to smaller shows. It would have been merely a parlor trick if not for the next thing. The front bell went again. I left them playing with their halos and returned with Heron, who had not brought a cup and looked insulted on behalf of liquids. He stayed standing, because he likes the moral view from altitude. While I was parking him and managing Fritz and the air, there was a shuffle at the side table, an apology to gravity, and the quiet of people being careful. When I turned back, Wolfe had his forefinger on the top carbon and his eyes were not a color for company. On the upper right corner of the onion skin, there bloomed a fresh, fragile ring, still wet enough to bead. Tiny crystals sparkled on the outer edge as the water retreated into the paper's fibers, and the gap in the circle sat at 2 o'clock like a signature. No one breathed. Even Fritz respected a miracle when it walked in. "Which of you," Wolfe said without heat, "cannot resist annotation?" I moved fast, because evidence in this room has a lifespan measured in indignation. I lifted the sheet by its bottom edge and slid a clean blotter under it. The ring, thin, even, seam-gap crisp, glowed under the lamp. I brought the side table closer with the cups. Evan's base had a smear, the kind you get when you set a cup down on a damp napkin and pick up lint. Moira's had a sugared tack to it that caught the fingerprint powder I keep for parties like this. I pressed a strip of transparent tape to the residue at the edge of the carbon's ring and lifted it. When I told Wolfe there was sugar, he didn't nod. He emitted something like it had been waiting on his tongue. "Caramel," he said. "Miss Dwyer's preference. But the seam orientation suggests Mr. Malloy's habitual angle." "Fascinating. I didn't," Moira said at once, and then again, smaller. "I didn't." Ivy looked at Evan, and Evan looked at the floor, and Heron looked like ethics had just given him a note. "No one is accused," Wolfe said, in a tone that could freeze water in grief. "But my house has been marked. That is intolerable and useful." He depressed a button on the phone and told me, "Saul." When Saul Panzer answers, he does so like a man declining to waste verbs. I gave him the address of the foundation, the names, the cafe, the hours, the ring, and the seam at 2 o'clock. Wolfe added assignments in a voice that never rose. Follow Mr. Malloy and Miss Vance for the next 48 hours. Learn whether the cafe stocks lids from more than one supplier. Recover from the trash the sleeves discarded the night of the decoy's return. Find out whether any of the building's cleaners moonlight with cameras, and, this with an extra ounce of syllable, acquire from Miss Ives a current schedule without alarming her. "Done," Saul said, and was. Heron cleared his throat as if asking for the floor in a courtroom he owned. "If someone is playing with documents," he said, "the rational course is to disclose." To control the narrative, the rational course, Wolfe said, is to deprive the actor of their stage. Ivy tilted back in her chair and studied the ceiling, finding nothing there to applaud. Evan rubbed a thumb over his sleeve where a dot of coffee had made a life. Moira folded her hands and made them still by ferocity. Wolfe's eyes closed. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "you will deliver the carbon to Mr. Vance in a sealed folder and say nothing about how it acquired ornament. On your way, stop at the cafe. Obtain a dozen cups. Ask no questions. Tonight we will teach someone the difference between mischief and leverage." I left with the sealed folder under my arm and a shopping list in my pocket that would have made a barista blush. The night had the kind of clear that makes glass feel proud. At the cafe, Kasia gave me a look like I'd come back to confess a crime and set out a line of cups as if we were choosing hats. 12-ounce, 16, demi-tasse, she said, tapping each as if they might answer. "You want lids too?" "We have 2 kinds since Wednesday. Supplier messed up the order." "2 kinds," I said. "What changed Wednesday?" "Old vendor back-ordered." She turned a sleeve so the little fern looked philosophical. "Now we have Vireo for 16, Metra Cup for 12. The seams don't land the same. Drives me crazy when I stack show me, I said. She obliged, lining them so the seams made a tiny parade. The 16 seams sat opposite the logo, the 12 set just shy of it. If you timed it on a clock, Vireo's gap fell right at 2 o'clock when you set it down with the logo facing you. Metricups landed closer to 4. Not a smoking gun, a smoking habit. Thursday night, I said casual. You were stocked like this? By 7, yes, she said. We ran out earlier, but I borrowed from the sandwich shop. Those were Vireo. 16s only. I left her a tip fat enough to forgive my curiosity and added a dozen cups and lids to my cargo. On a hunch, I asked the building sergeant if he had last Thursday's trash from the cafe. He tipped, his head toward a gray bin that had seen things. If this becomes an inspection, he warned, and I promised him only good intentions and a pair of gloves. The sleeves in the bin were mostly Fern Vireo, late-night strata stacked by impatience. I bagged a handful like I was going home to craft with them. At Vance's floor, the air did its expensive best. Moira met me at the door to his office and took the folder with the concentration of a bomb tech. Gideon stood behind the desk, not sitting, as if the chair had become a witness he wasn't ready to question. Mr. Goodwin, he said, any progress? Mr. Wolfe has appetites, I said, and patience. He'll feed one with the other. I set the folder on the desk's top right corner. By instruction, this stays here. It is logged. It is not locked. Moira's eyes widened at the sacrilege. Not in the safe? Not unless Mr. Wolfe changes religions, I said. For now it lives where hands will itch. Gideon's mouth made a thin line that wasn't quite consent. He looked older by 2 days than he had in our office, which is a bad trick to learn. I received this a half hour ago, he said, and slid across a single sheet of printer paper. It was a scan, photocopy gray, that showed the opening paragraph of the apology, slanted and imperfect, as if it had been laid under a lid by someone in a hurry. The right corner sported a faint ring, lighter than ours, but kin. Delivered how? I asked. Under my door, he said. No note. In-house message, I said. A knock that doesn't want to be caught knocking. Heron drifted in as if he'd been conjured by the word message. He scanned the folder with the eyes of a man who inventories liabilities and nodded at me. If this has become a game of brinksmanship, he announced, the law prefers we own the brink. And tumble together, I said. We choose our fall, he corrected. Gideon, I will say it again. Disclosure removes the theater. Sometimes, I said, it hires a better lighting designer. I looked at Moira. Log it. Leave it. Don't warn anyone, she swallowed. That will be difficult. That's why you'll be good at it, I told her. Also, move the brass tray closer to the center. If someone puts a cup down where instinct tells them, the tray will interfere and you'll get the truth. The move after the move. She obeyed awkwardly, because people who do things right hate staging wrongness. I set one of my fresh manila folders, empty and innocent, under the corner of the sealed envelope so that the top right edge made a little landing strip. Vance looked like he wanted to evacuate the building of all right angles. Go home, I told him, or don't. But don't hover. Hovering ruins photographs, I nodded to the camera by the ceiling. And we're counting on photographs. In the lobby, I parked myself with a view of the corridor. Camera feed, courtesy of the sergeant who was coming around to the entertainment value of governance. At 7:58, Regina passed without breaking stride, coat on, chin set to executive. At 8:06, Evan appeared with a camera strap and a cup, fidgety. At 8:09, Ivy swept by empty-handed and dangerous. At 8:12, Moira emerged, stood a moment like she'd forgotten whether she was going home, and went back inside. At 8:17, Heron came out, alone, left hand carrying a file, Right hand free. No cleaners yet. No donors. No Santa Claus. The minutes did that slow thickening trick they do when you ask them to perform. At 8:23, the corridor caught a blur near Vance's door. Two figures overlapping. One pause, a shoulder turn that could be a whisper. The camera's angle is the kind that always loses a case. I gave it 30 seconds and took the elevator up. Moira met me in the hall, hands folded so tight you could have typed with them. "I went to the restroom," she said, confessing to a human act with professional guilt. "When I came back, Ivy and Evan were leaving his door." She said she was borrowing light. I didn't ask what that meant. Light is what Evan pulls like ribbon out of air. We went in. The sealed folder sat precisely where I'd left it, which is also where gravity leaves things. The brass tray had a new companion, a ring on the top right of the manila under the envelope. Thin, fresh, distinct. 2 o'clock. Beside it, faint and slightly inside, was a second crescent, as if someone had placed the cup, adjusted it, placed it again. 2 small moons kissing. I bent close. There were tiny crystals on the outer rim again. Not a lot, just enough to say that someone's drink had sweetened the story. I looked at the brass tray. It had a damp spot like a conscience failing late. On the carpet near the desk there was a sprinkle of something that might have been sugar or static or nerves. I stooped and took a grain, touched it to my tongue because I'm an optimist. Caramel, with the dignity cooked out of it. "Was anyone else here?" I asked. "Heron came to ask Mr. Vance to sign something," Moira said. "He didn't stay." Regina texted to say the board packet was finalized. Evan said he wanted to shoot the lines of the blinds across the desk. Ivy said... She stopped. "What did Ivy say?" She said, "If you hide a word, it grows teeth." I took the sealed folder and turned it under the light. No breach. The ring had done its demonstration and retreated. I took a sheet of the building's letterhead and laid it on the landing strip and set one of the cafe's Vireo 16s down and picked it up and laid it down and picked it up until my ring matched the twin kisses on the manila. Then I took a 12 and tried the same. The breaks didn't lie. Vireo sang 2 o'clock like a hymn. Metricup sulked at 4. "Who was holding a 16? I asked Moira. "Heaven," she said. Ivy stole sips. I had a 12, Heron. "He brings his own ceramic." It has Latin on it. "Non sibi," not for self, I know the type, I said. I snapped a quick shot of the ring with my phone against the cafe cups for Wolfe and told Moira to go home before ethics required a cot. On my way out, I told the sergeant that if the camera grew generous later, he should call me. He told me the camera was a miser. Driving back, I checked the mirror. A gray sedan kept polite distance, the kind that thinks politeness is camouflage. I took 2 silly turns and it stayed silly with me, then peeled off at Lexington where politeness got a red light and pride didn't. I signed it as someone's idea of caution and let it go. Wolfe had used the time to not move and to be brilliant. I put the manila on his desk like a relic and gave him the night's stations of the ring. He didn't say, or He let the facts stand where he could see whether they slouched. 2 placements, he said after a breath. Not 1. A set and an adjustment. Mr. Malloy sets, Miss Vance adjusts. The sugar is Miss Dwyer's specie, but sweetness is not unique to her. Cafes sell treacle to crowds. The seam sings Vireo. 16. Miss Dwyer's 12 is Metricup. 4 o'clock. Good Heron is clean, I said, unless he's taken to bringing paper cups with Latin. He's not clean, Wolfe said. He's merely not wet. He shut his eyes and let the office be a pond. We have a confession without words. The pair who hovered over Mr. Vance's desk could not resist annotation. The decoy has attracted its gnats. What now? I asked. We tighten, he said. Saul will bring us sleeve lots and a janitor's testimony on whether Miss Vance respects doors. You will telephone Miss Ives in the morning and ask her to call at 11. We will also ask Mr. Vance, Miss Pell, Mr. Heron, Miss Dwyer, Miss Vance, and Mr. Malloy to be here at noon. The story wishes to be read aloud. We will give it its audience. You're staging an office gathering, I said. I am repositioning the furniture, he said, and opened his eyes. Before that, Mr. Goodwin, go back to the cafe when it opens. Purchase another dozen Vareo 16s from the fresh sleeve. If the seam shift is different, I will admire the irony. Also, send Mr. Vance a message. He is to pretend to write a second letter tonight, addressed to the board chair. He will leave it in his safe. He will tell no one, and he will sleep. What's in the second letter? I asked. The same words, he said, but with a sentence added that only the thief would fear. He closed his eyes again, satisfied like a man who has just arranged the world on a plate. And Mr. Goodwin, no coffee on my paper. Morning put a crisp edge on things that hadn't asked for it. I was at the cafe when the gate rattled up and Kasia let in the day with one hand and a sigh. She had a fresh sleeve of 16s open before I could tell her I liked my evidence early. I made her indulge me. Line them up, seams forward, clock the gap. Vareo still sang 2 o'clock with the logo facing you. The 12s from Metricup sulked at 4. If fate intended irony, it would have to try later. I bought a dozen 16s and a dozen 12s and left her with the impression that I was opening a gallery devoted to circles. The building sergeant, who was beginning to enjoy being complicit without paperwork, let me pour the previous night's trash again. The sleeves were Vareo and sticky in the way caramel lives on as archaeology. I bagged a handful and told him I'd pay him back in boredom. Saul phoned while I was walking out into a morning that made glass preen. He doesn't waste adjectives. 2 things, he said. Janitor on Vance's floor says Miss Vance treats employees only as philosophy, not policy. Also, public scanner on 6, self-serve, lobby side. Yesterday, 7:55 to 8:05 p.m. 2 black and white jobs, no account, printed to glass bed. Guy with a camera strap helped. Logs don't name, but there's a security cam for the hall. I'll have frames. Good, I said. Bring your frames and a fern sleeve so Mr. Wolfe can congratulate himself. I'll bring 2, he said, and hung up so the city could resume. At 11, Camilla Ives arrived like a woman who keeps promises on a shelf and dusts them. Early 30s now, I guessed. The kind of compose that takes practice and loss. She had a portfolio under her arm that had seen decent rooms and a look that told you she'd stopped waiting for rooms to be decent to her. I'm aware I am a complication, she said in our hall, and smiled just enough to refuse pity. Mr. Wolfe asked me to come and to say nothing until told to speak. Is this a house that likes obedience? It prefers choreography, I told her, and steered her into the office. Wolfe didn't rise. He rarely gives that gift. He greeted her like a man who likes the sound of his own manners and asked if she would be comfortable waiting upstairs with the orchids until noon. She said yes in a tone that made comfort optional. Before Fritz conducted her to civilization, I asked, "Did you receive anything? Note, copy, whisper?" "An email 2 days ago," she said, "from a blank address. A photograph of a paragraph that felt like an apology without its nouns. And yesterday, a request from Ivy Vance to interview me for a column about the cost of institutional rumor." I did not answer either. "I dislike being staged." "Good," Wolfe said. "We will stage for you." At 12-5, the brownstone began collecting our audience the way air collects dust when you open a window. Gideon came first, taut from a night he had tried to command. Regina arrived on a breath of managerial weather. Heron brought his posture and a ceramic mug with Latin. Moira came with a face that had memorized rules it didn't write. Ivy and Evan arrived together, because of course they did, and tried to look like coincidence. Fritz served water in glasses placed on coasters as if they were shipwreck survivors rescued to islands. No coffee. Even temptation has a dress code. Wolfe let the room find its seats and then, because he's democratic in only one sense, spoke as if it were a privilege to listen. "A letter," he said, "is an instrument. It can instruct, accuse, absolve, or misused. It can merely hurt. Mr. Vance wrote a letter that intended to repair an error. It was not sent. Someone decided to use its existence to alter a vote that someone prefers theatre to remedy. I am indifferent to theatre unless the script is mine." Ivy gave him a smile that offered to buy the theatre and close it. Heron examined the carpet for grounds of appeal. Regina did not blink. She would have considered blinking a concession. Wolfe turned a hand, and I put the sealed folder on the edge of his desk, the same manila with last night's twin rings, still faint as ghosts. I set beside it a clean sheet. A little to the left, a brass tray, the furniture of appetite. "This," Wolfe said, "was placed last night on Mr. Vance's desk where the eye is drawn and the hand is tempted. The hand obliged. Twice. The breaks in the circles announce the supplier of the cup and the habit of the placer. The sugar announces a palate. The security apparatus of your building announces the hour. None of this alone is conclusive. Together it produces a melody, with occasional wrong notes that may be conducted." He nodded at me, and I provided the melody. Cafe seams at 2 for 16, 4 for 12. Sleeves recovered sticky as a conscience. The public scanner logs. The hall camera's silhouette that made a shoulder a suspect. The ring on our carbon in this room, the ring on the manila in Vance's. The adjustment ring that kisses the first like a correction. Moira's 12 and it's 4 o'clock, Evan's 16 and it's 2, Ivy's hand adjusting cups as naturally as breath. I kept it clean. If a man is going to be accused, he should recognize his signature. Evan's Adam's apple agreed that it was unhelpful to be a person whose hands like to arrange. Ivy watched Wolfe like he was a writer with a bad paragraph, and she had a pen. Heron cleared his throat. "This is clever," he said. "It is not proof." "No," Wolfe said. "Proof belongs to courts. We have something less pompous, understanding, but since theatrics are in season, Mr. Goodwin." I went to the door and signaled. Fritz, who understands cues, ushered in Camilla Ives. "If you want to test a room, introduce conscience." Ivy stiffened, then went very still. Evan sat forward because images, unlike ethics, always interest him. Gideon's eyes said things he would never allow his mouth. Wolfe gave Camilla his equivalent of a bow. "Miss Ives, forgive the crude economy of spectacle. We will try to be brief." She met Gideon's eyes, then looked at Regina, then Heron, then at Moira, as if kindness might be contagious. "I came because I don't like being a rumor in someone else's house," she said. "Nor I," Wolfe said. He shifted his gaze to Heron. "Counsel, at 7:55 last evening a paragraph of Mr. Vance's apology was scanned on a public machine on the 6th floor. There is a camera in that hall. Mr. Panzer will shortly deliver the frames. I suspect they will show Mr. Malloy assisting Miss Vance." At 8:23, a cup was placed and adjusted beside the sealed folder in Mr. Vance's office. The ring agrees with the cafe's 16-ounce seam orientation. Miss Dwyer's 12 would not suffice. Mr. Heron's ceramic would not betray him. Miss Pell does not drink at desks. He let the catalogue rest. "Miss Vance, Mr. Malloy, do you wish to declare something before I finish conducting?" Ivy's chin tipped a fraction. If she were a violin, she would always play a little sharp to make sure you heard. "Declare what?" "That a foundation chair should be earned in daylight. That my father's apology is an apology, not a personal brand exercise. That copying a page proves only that secrecy makes cowards creative." Declare, Wolfe said, that you returned the decoy to Mr. Vance's desk because mischief gives you leverage. Declare that you believe the letter belongs to your narrative, not his. Declare, perhaps, that you love a man who arranges light and believed you could arrange this. Evan's mouth opened and then closed. He looked at Ivy, and what you could see in his eyes was a good man deciding whether loyalty means saying what the other can't. Ivy saved him the trouble. I put a page on his desk, she said, calm like a pilot explaining turbulence. Not the apology, your decoy. I wanted him to feel what it is to have a thing appear where he thought he controlled it. I didn't break his safe. I didn't steal anything. I returned a lesson. You scanned, Heron said, almost kindly, because he likes a confession when it meets his expectations. I copied a paragraph someone slid under his door earlier, she said. I didn't send it anywhere. Yet Wolfe let a small silence sit, not heavy, just precise. And the coffee ring. Evan jumped. That's on me, he said, fast and foolish. She grabbed my cup and I put it down and you adjusted it, Wolfe said, as you adjust lights. He tilted his head. Why did you not leave the ring on the brass tray where the temptation was provided? Evan looked at the tray like it had betrayed him, because the tray looked staged. Ah, Wolfe said, the syllable a little morsel of pleasure. And staging must be yours. Gideon's voice, when it came, had weight and winter. Ivy. She looked at him, and whatever fights they'd rehearsed at other tables came to sit with them. You wanted to make amends in private, she said. I wanted you to understand that refusing daylight is another harm. And so you, what, nudge a rumor back into the world? I asked. Hope it grows the right teeth? I hoped it would force him to act, she said, and for the first time a small crack showed in the enamel of being right. I thought, if he is pushed, he will push truth. Wolfe breathed, which you could almost call a gesture. Mr. Vance, he said, your daughter is not my thief. She is a meddler, not a burglar. The letter that first vanished, someone took it before any of this theater. Someone with access, and with a use for it beyond pedagogy, he let that find its level while Camilla studied the carpet as if it might bloom. Mr. Goodwin, bring the safe logs. Moira had them ready like a penance. I took them from her and placed them in Wolfe's hand. He did not read so much as let his finger travel. Wednesday, 3 weeks past, he said. Miss Pell at 1:30, Mr. Vance at 5, Miss Dwyer at 7. The following morning, Mr. Vance discovers absence. He lifted his eyes to Regina. Miss Pell, what did you remove at 1:30? Donor files, she said, as logged. Indeed, he said. And at 7, Miss Dwyer returned the apology after Mr. Vance told her not to send it, which means when she opened the safe, it was still there. He tapped the margin. So between 7 and 5, someone with combination and opportunity removed it. That is not Miss Vance. That is not Mr. Malloy. That is not Mr. Heron, who does not touch safes without witnesses. He finally looked at Gideon. And you, sir, did not remove from your own safe an apology you intended to reconsider by morning. Wolfe let the room feel its spine. Which leaves, he said softly enough to sand wood, the person who opened the safe at 1:30 and believes coasters prevent consequence. He turned his head. Miss Pell, why did you need the letter removed then? Regina held his gaze the way competent people hold a heavy tray, steadily, because dropping is unacceptable. Because, she said, I intended to prevent Gideon from making a personal covenant that would bind the foundation. A draft apology in a safe is a risk. I took it to ensure it could not be used against him or us. And now, Wolfe said, it is being used by someone else. He settled back as if a chair could applaud. We will finish the lesson. Regina didn't blink at Wolfe's last line. She folded one ankle over the other like the chair had been designed for that purpose and said, Prevent is not the same as possess. Only when prevention doesn't require a pocket, I said. Heron started to speak. Wolfe held up a finger and pointed it not at him, but at Moira. At 7 o'clock, Miss Dwyer. Precisely what did you return to the safe? The draft he dictated that afternoon, she said, relief and dread sharing a syllable. Not the original. Typed a clean version. He read it. He said, "Not tonight," and I logged it back. So, Wolfe said, and let the so ripen. At 7, a typed draft, your work, was placed in the safe. The original, a prior version in Mr. Vance's hand, was at some point removed. When Mr. Vance discovered absence in the morning, he meant the original. We have been speaking of two instruments as if they were one. The distinction is not pedantry. It is intent. Regina's mouth made an almost smile, a recognition of craft. The original was dangerous, she said. A private covenant. The typed draft was a thought. I removed the former and told myself I was guarding the institution from sentiment masquerading as policy. Where did you place it? Wolfe asked, when you were finished telling yourself that. In my office safe, she said. Temporarily. How long is temporarily? I asked. Until Gideon chose procedure over impulse, she said, with all the calm of a woman who expects to be obeyed by clocks. And the photocopy slid under Mr. Vance's door yesterday, I said. Whose impulse was that? She hesitated for the first time. Her eyes ticked to Heron and back. Not mine. Heron made a sound like a courtroom clearing its throat. Before this becomes pagan confession, he said, we need to understand that possession for preservation is not theft. Miss Pell believes in governance. She overreached. That is corrigible. Wolfe's eyelids drifted down. And what did you do, Mr. Heron, when Miss Pell overreached? Draft a policy, compose a memo, or borrow a copier? Heron's brows went up a quarter inch. I did not slide anything under anyone's door. The doorbell upstairs gave a discreet ping that meant a friend was here. I went, because Saul Panza does not ring. He arrives. He handed me an envelope and a plastic bag containing 2 café sleeves and a printout still warm from an impolite machine. Scanning hall frames, he said. And then, because he is generous, also keycard pulls for last night, acquired via a custodian with a grievance and a taste for Danish. We went back in. Wolfe took the frames and studied them with the care he usually reserves for orchids who lie. One showed the public scanner on 6 with Ivy's jacket sleeve at the edge of the image and a camera strap arc that belonged to Evan like a signature. The time stamp read 7:58 p.m. Another frame later showed a figure at Mr. Vance's corridor door at 10:44 p.m., head turned toward a keypad, shoulders square, coat cut neat. The grain could have been kinder. It didn't need to be. Keycard, I said, reading from Saul's printout. Suite entry, 10:41 p.m. Pell, Regina. Exit, 10:52 p.m. 10 minutes to read a letter you weren't supposed to know existed. Regina's hands stayed composed on her knee. He told you to bait a trespass, she said to Wolfe without heat. I admired the economy and went to read what was left for me to fear, and you found, Wolfe said, not merely the old apology, but a new one addressed to the board chair. With an added sentence, set like a hook, he turned his head toward Heron. It read, in Mr. Vance's words, for removal of doubt, Counsel holds a certified copy of my original apology in the confidential annex, designator C. I have informed him I intend to read this into the minutes. Heron stiffened as if the Latin on his mug had pinched him. Regina's gaze flicked toward him again and this time landed. Wolfe didn't wait for her to retrieve it. You read that, he said, and you telephoned Mr. Heron. Mr. Heron, show us Heron did what men who love propriety do when propriety deserts them. He appealed to context. I do not answer to you, Mr. Wolfe. No, Wolfe said. Answer to habit. You're a careful man who keeps records of uncomfortable things so he can later explain them. Your phone, please?" He hesitated. His eyes went to Gideon and back. Then, with the stiff grace of a reluctant donor, he produced the device and thumbed to a thread. Wolfe did not touch it. He allowed me to read, because a man like Wolfe knows the value of a witness whose voice sounds less like judgment. At 10:56 p.m., a message from Regina. "Delete Annex C today." A second, a minute later. "We will formalize remedy tomorrow." Do not allow a stray line to become policy. Heron's reply, 3 words, "No such annex." Which was true, Wolfe said gently, and not what Miss Pell asked. She did not ask whether it existed. She asked you to destroy it. The trap sentence did its work. Only the person who had read the bait letter after hours, privately, would know to panic at a reference to a non-existent annex. Thank you for confirming you are the person who panicked. Regina drew in a breath and set it down carefully. If the sentence had been true, she said, it would have been malpractice. And because it wasn't, I said, it was pedagogy. You went to the safe. You read the letter you didn't want to exist. You texted counsel to erase something he didn't have because you believed you still controlled the shelf where documents get to be real. Meanwhile, someone else had already used your first removal to create leverage. Ivy's smile now had less enamel. Which someone? Wolfe turned to her, and for the first time all morning, let a little warmth into the air. You were mischief, he said. You are not the harm. The harm is subtler and older, an instinct to keep the house clean by sweeping under rugs. Miss Pell is a meticulous woman. She took the original to prevent impropriety and created a new one. When copies began to appear, door slots, scans, she was no longer alone. The letter is not in her safe now. It isn't, Regina said, and a hairline crack appeared in the marble. 2 weeks after I placed it there, I gave it to counsel for destruction. He declined. I then moved it to a locked file at a third-party record service. Heron nodded once. Because if I had destroyed it, you would have made me the story. I placed it on legal hold. It exists. It is not public. It is not yours legal hold, I repeated, and yet fragments creep like ivy. Who slid the copy under Vance's door? Heron looked genuinely tired for the first time. Not I. Wolfe let his eyes close a moment, then opened them as if he had decided on the dessert course. Miss Dwyer, he said, who else besides you and Mr. Vance handles internal mail in the suite after hours? The night porter, she said. James. He's careful and he likes us because we label boxes. He wouldn't meddle. Who on the board has a pass-through box? Only Mr. Vance and Miss Pell. Good, Wolfe said. Mr. Panzer. Saul, who had remained politely invisible in a chair near the door, set a small evidence bag on the edge of the desk. Inside were 2 cafe sleeves with the Fern logo and the cafe's initials stamped in ink by a bored teen with ambitions. On one sleeve, in graphite, someone had written Gallery Light 815 and a half-sketched rectangle. On the other, 2 initials, E.V. Saul said, trash from last night, cafe bin. The sleeves matched the lot printed Thursday. I also spoke to the porter. He says a folded sheet was handed to him at 8 by a man with a camera strap and a girl who did the talking. The girl asked, "Can you slide this under my father's door?" He's expecting it. He did. Evan opened his mouth. Ivy beat him there. Yes, she said, blunt as a brick. I wanted him to see it. It was the paragraph someone slid under earlier, not the whole thing. You want contrition without performance? Fine. I wanted performance. Wolfe lifted a palm, and that sufficed to prevent further virtue from venturing out. We accept your confession of theater, he said. It is noted, and it is now useless as leverage. What remains is the original and the use to which it has been put by someone other than you. Miss Pell, the record service. Name and box. She held for 3 seconds, long enough to measure the cost, not long enough to be a hero, and gave it. I wrote it down and handed it to Saul, who was up before the paper cooled. Wolfe added, "Ask the clerk who requested access in the last 3 weeks. There will be a pattern. Someone who believes moving pieces around a board constitutes strategy." "Heron," Ivy said. "Savage. Because even when she's wrong, she is sure, is strategy." Heron didn't take the bait. "Strategy obeys law," he said. "If I'd intended to move it, I would have sent a letter on letterhead." Wolfe ignored the squall and faced Gideon. "Sir, you allowed a rumor to drive a decision and allowed propriety to drive concealment. The result is the worst of both. Before we finish today, you will tell Miss Ives what you should have told her then. Before you do, one more adjustment to the furniture." He had me collect the 2 cups on the side table, props now, and remove them. He had Fritz bring in a small portable scanner from the cabinet we pretend is part of the furniture and set it on a side stand. Then he looked at Evan. "Mr. Malloy," he said, "a favor. Stand there. Imagine a perfect shot of a powerful man at a desk with a letter on its corner. Where do you place the light?" Evan, almost in relief at a question that spoke his language, moved to the side, turned his shoulders, and gestured. "Here," he said. "You bounce from the right so you get the lines of the blinds." "And where?" Wolfe asked. "Do you ask him to set his cup so the glare doesn't ghost the paper?" "Top right," Evan said, and then heard himself. A decent man blushed. "Thank you," Wolfe said. "You're dismissed as a villain and retained as an accessory to a metaphor." He turned back to Regina with a softness that wasn't mercy and wasn't mockery. "Return the original. Mr. Panzer will acquire it if you do not. And before you lecture Mr. Vance about optics, consider that glass shows smudges more faithfully than paper. You cannot remove a stain by moving the table." Regina exhaled. It sounded like someone opening a window in a room that has been polite for too long. "You'll have it by evening," she said. "Not evening," Wolfe said. "Now. We will wait." Regina didn't argue about now. She took out her phone, made 1 call to the record service, then a second when the first person tried to hide behind a policy. Her voice lost 0 polish and gained a cutting edge you could use to slice contracts. 10 minutes later, a courier was on his way with a sealed pouch and a chain of custody sheet that would make a district attorney hum. We sat in that quiet. Wolfe grows like an herb. It isn't silence, it's the space where momentum comes to heal. Gideon stood, hands behind his back, looking at Camilla the way a man looks at a verdict he hopes is merciful. Ivy watched him and tried not to. Evan fixed on light that didn't need fixing. Moira counted breaths and blamed none of them. Heron examined us all and came up clean in his own inventory. The bell rang again and I brought in the pouch. The clerk had stamped it twice and signed with a flourish that suggested someone had explained liability to him in vivid detail. I opened it on Wolfe's nod. Inside was a heavy ivory sheet in Gideon's hand. The original apology, not the typed contrition we'd seen. It looked like what it was, a man's first attempt at saying what he'd postponed too long. And at the upper right, 3/4 of an inch in, sat a pale blot with a tiny tail. Coffee, not a ring. A drop that had landed and traveled before it died. Wolfe did not touch the stain. He lifted the page by its left lower corner and let the light ride the fibers. When he spoke, it was half to the air and half to physics. "Not placed," he said. "Lifted. A droplet carried by motion. The tail drifts southeast. I set it for the room. If you lift a cup with your right hand, the last bead tends to swing left as you move away. Left hand, it swings right. That tail angles to 4 o'clock. Heron's gaze met mine and stayed there, calm as statute. In the cafe, Kasia had said he drank ceramic, left hand, no sugar. sleeve tucked neat. Ceramic or paper, the droplet still obeys the arm. Saul, who actually collects receipts, while the rest of us collect opinions, laid down a second envelope. "Record service log," he said. "Last access to Mr. Vance's box prior to today. Council's authorization. Last Friday, 3:12 p.m. Signature R. Kell. Paralegal, Heron's office. Viewing room B has a coffee station. Disposable cups, 12 and 16. No lids." Heron didn't flinch, but some part of him applied a mental coaster. "Legal hold requires occasional inspection," he said. The document was examined to confirm it remained intact. "Nothing about that implies malice." "Nothing about that implies tidiness either," I said. "If you dripped on it." Wolfe made a thin gesture. "No histrionics," he said. "We were misled here only by sequence." Miss Pell removed the original to protect the foundation and discovered protection has teeth. Mr. Heron put it on hold to ensure he could one day choreograph disclosure on his terms. Miss Vance and Mr. Malloy staged petty hauntings to jolt a conscience. Meanwhile, the letter acquired a blemish that tells us whose hand last wielded custody with enough casualness to bring a cup to a box. Regina's voice dropped the polish for once. "Lyle." "I did not circulate anything," Heron said, still even. "If a paragraph slid under a door, it was not by my instruction. I don't send ghosts. I send letters." "Which would be worse," Ivy said, and then stopped, because for once saying the most savage version didn't help. Wolfe did something he rarely does. He let mercy into his cadence. "Miss Ives," he said, turning from the paper to her, "Mr. Vance wishes to say to you what he should have said before any of us were invited to this ungainly ballet." Gideon stepped forward. "The brownstone doesn't encourage speeches, but sometimes it allows them." He spoke without paper. "Miss Ives," he said, and got her name right as if that were the starting line and not the finish. "I relied on a rumor that suited an appetite for tidiness. It was wrong. I wronged you. If you will accept it, I will make a public correction and a private grant from my funds. Not as a favor. As repair, Camilla didn't pretend it was enough and didn't decorate it either. I will accept a public correction," she said, "and not a grant to me, but an endowed line in my field administered by a committee that does not report to you if you want to repair something, build something you can't control." Gideon's nod carried the weight of 10 years and a morning. "Done," he said. Heron started to object and found no footing. Regina, to her credit, did not try to turn the moment into a memo. Moira exhaled like someone who had been worrying on behalf of other people and could take a turn for herself. Ivy, who had been longing for performance, found herself with substance instead and had to decide if that would do. Wolfe, who never lets an outcome escape without a label, let the room settle and then flicked his eyes to Saul. Saul obliged with one more item. A print from the lobby cam this morning at 9 showing the same paralegal who'd signed at the record service dropping a padded mailer at a downtown copy shop. The timestamp overlapped with the hour Camilla had received an email from a blank account. Heron watched the print like it was a cloud, forming into a shape he didn't appreciate. "Arkell does not act without assignment," he said. Wolfe's mouth curved not quite into a smile. "No, counsel. He acts with habit. He sees a document on hold. He conforms it. He makes a ghost for your file. He tests whether it compels behavior. You did not need to instruct the underdog gambit. You created the weather in which it occurs. You preferred the narrative in which you control disclosure. This is the narrative you get. Coffee on the paper, ordinary and indelible." Ivy sank back, the fight going somewhere less showy. "So the conspiracy is that there isn't one," she said. "Just people serving different gods, tidiness, law, righteousness, and bumping letters into bruises." "That," Wolfe said, "is almost eloquent. Keep it. Do not publish it." Regina turned toward Gideon. We will have to explain this to the board with enough sharpness that they don't try to make a theorem out of one error." "You will," Wolfe said. "You will also confess your removal. Toupees fool no one. Neither do euphemisms. If you want the chair, earn it by telling the truth without embroidery." She accepted the sentence like a familiar weight. "And you," she said to Heron without malice, "will instruct your paralegal on the difference between legal hold and theatre." Heron inclined his head. "I prefer theatre with better scripts," he said, which was him signing his own reprimand. Wolfe glanced at the original again and then, to my surprise, reached for it. He did not touch the stain. He folded the sheet once, precisely, and slipped it back into the pouch. "This," he said, "goes to Mr. Vance. Not to the records service, not to counsel. He will bring it to his board, read it into the minutes, and place it into the minutes' custody where it can neither be brandished nor buried." Gideon took the pouch like a man accepting both penance and permission. He looked at Camilla again. "You will name the committee," he said. "I will only sign." I got the sense that if Ivy had been given a better childhood, she might have smiled without edge. As it was, she let some of the enamel drop and said to her father, "Try daylight without a chaperone for once." "Enough," Wolfe said, but without sting. He had me call for Fritz to bring in lunch because he decided this gathering had earned soup and a steak sandwich and the deep comfort of schedules reasserted. Before I could leave, Saul's phone hummed. He read a text, then handed it to me to hand to Wolfe, because we are all furniture in that particular dance. "Addendum," Saul said. "Copy shop guy says the padded mailer was empty when it left. Paralegal scanned and sent to a secure email that traces to Heron's firm's box. No outbound from there to Miss Ives. Underdoor stunt was Ivy and Evan, as we had. The blank email to Miss Ives came from a throwaway created at a public kiosk 2 blocks from the foundation." "Not counsel," I said. "Not necessary," Wolfe answered. "Counsel arranged the universe. Others populated it." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, the matter was formalized in that private court of his. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "you will accompany Mr. Vance to his board this afternoon and sit in the last row, where you can see who winces when he says, 'I was wrong.' Miss Dwyer will bring me the updated access protocol she will now write. Miss Pell will prepare her confession and her plan for a clean procedure going forward. Mr. Heron will drink his coffee at a remove from paper for the rest of his life. And, Miss Vance—" "I know," Ivy said, with something almost like a laugh that had learned better manners. "Don't publish." "Publish later," Wolfe said. "Publish something built, not something broken." He took a long breath, which in this sanctuary is as loud as a gavel. "We are nearly done. One thing remains that annoys me. This house was marked by a ring last night. I do not permit that. Mr. Goodwin." "I'll get the blotter framed," I said. "Get it replaced," he muttered. "Then frame it." The board met in a room that believed glass cured character. The table was an oval big enough to seat remorse and still have room for coffee. Coasters waited at each place like moral reminders. I took the last row as ordered and let the architecture preen. Gideon stood at the short axis with the pouch in his hand and a face set to the quiet you use when you're done bargaining with yourself. Regina was already in position, notes squared. Heron took the flank and slipped his mug under his chair, like Latin was contraband. Ivy sat in the gallery with the public. 2 reporters, a donor who collected reputations, and Evan, who was pretending light would be helpful if it broke. They ran through one item about funds that behaved and another about a roof that didn't. Then Gideon asked for the floor and got it because no one had the nerve to ask what he planned to do with it. He didn't look at his daughter or at Regina or at Heron. He looked at Camilla Ives, who sat 2 seats from the end with a portfolio that had been placed, and then he looked at his trustees. "I was wrong," he said. "6 years ago, I allowed a rumor to stand in for proof. It was convenient to what I wanted to believe. It harmed a person. The person is here. I am going to read an apology I wrote then and failed to send. I will then propose a remedy that does not depend on me." He opened the pouch, took the heavy sheet like it weighed something besides paper, and read it into the minutes in a voice that didn't perform contrition. It did the work. The room did 3 movements: stiffen, breathe, and pretend it had expected this. When he finished, he didn't sit. "My proposal," he said, and the word proposal behaved for once, "is an endowed line in Miss Ives's field, governed by an independent committee, selected by peers who do not report here. I will fund it personally. The foundation will publicize it without attaching my name. We will also adopt a protocol for rumor. It is never sufficient for action. If it surfaces, it triggers inquiry by a standing ethics subcommittee with no vote on grants." A trustee with hair that had been told to look sober said something about precedent. Regina answered him in 4 sentences that were cleaner than law and sharper than politics. "The precedent is accuracy," she said. "If we lose donors who prefer gossip to process, we have clarified our market. If we keep them, it is because they wanted integrity when they say integrity." Heron, to his credit, did not filibuster. "Council supports a policy that quarantines rumor," he said. "Council also notes that private apologies become weapons if hoarded. Disclosure disables certain theatrics." They took questions, the sort that ask if daylight will hurt the furniture. Gideon didn't flinch. When a trustee tried to turn the subject to the chair renewal, Gideon saved them the trouble of sounding indignant. "I am withdrawing my candidacy," he said. It made a sound in the room like a coaster being set down hard. "I will remain through transition. We will hold a new vote next month. If Regina had rehearsed an acceptance, she kept it upstream. Between now and then," she said, "you will receive a policy packet that includes my role in removing a draft apology to a secondary safe 3 weeks ago. An overreach undertaken in the name of protecting the institution. I will accept censure for that. I ask for your support, not because I was tidy, but because I am willing to admit that tidiness is not governance." Ivy turned enough to catch my eye. The look said she was recalibrating a headline into something a little less happy, to be sharp. Then she did something I didn't expect. She didn't speak. Evan's shoulders lost an inch of tension, which on him is a concession. The vote wasn't about chairs, it was about whether they would allow the amendment and the endowment. It passed with only one trustee asking if anonymity on Gideon's check was strictly necessary. Regina told him it was. Camilla spoke once, brief and clean. "Thank you." The word carried no garnish and didn't need it. They adjourned because no one wanted to spoil a moment by letting other business remind them people are ordinary. On the sidewalk, Ivy lit a breath like it might be a cigarette and decided against both. "So he stepped down," she said to me, not asking what I thought because she already knew I make a habit of thinking in private. "Did Wolfe predict that?" "Wolfe doesn't predict," I said. "He arranges the weather and watches people dress for it." "And you?" she said. "I carry umbrellas," I told her. "And blotters." Back at the brownstone, Fritz had kept soup warm and the steak sandwich patient. Wolfe received my report the way a mountain receives a cloud, indifferent but improved. I gave him Gideon's reading, Regina's confession, the vote, the withdrawal, the endowment, Ivy's restraint, Heron's Latin in the dark. He made the small noise he saves for when human beings, against pattern, behave marginally better than expected. "Good," he said. "Mr. Vance has correctly assessed appetite. He will eat less of power and more of responsibility. Miss Pell has learned that prevention without candor is merely theft with manners. Council," he added, with the delicacy he uses for mold on cheese, "will henceforth mind liquids." Fritz brought the new blotter, crisp, innocent, without history, and I slid it under Wolfe's hands with ceremony. The old one lay in a frame I'd had made at a shop that specializes in saving people from their own taste. The ring had dried to a faint planet with a weather system. I propped it against the bookcase for the moment. Wolfe eyed it like a relic he had not asked to venerate. "You intend to hang that?" he asked. "I intend to remember it," I said. "Remember what?" he said. "That a ring is a signature," I said, "and that signatures can be read." He accepted the aphorism on credit and turned to Camilla, who had returned with Fritz after touring the orchids. He told her, without using a single extra syllable, that she should send him the names of 3 peers who would be incapable of treating an endowment like a ladder. She thanked him with a smile. You don't give men who like the sound of their ethics. She gave me a card that smelled faintly of work. Then she left, and with her went the patch of air that had been holding a long grievance without making a parade of it. Ivy sent no column that night. Evan sent Wolfe a photograph he'd taken of the boardroom's glass. At the moment, Gideon said, "I was wrong." You could see everyone twice, once in themselves, once in their reflection, and for once the reflections didn't add confusion. They underlined the point. Saul delivered 2 receipts and a remark. The receipts are only interesting to those of us who file these things. The remark was that the paralegal had bought a new mug. "Stainless," Saul said, "with a lid." He looked chastened. "Good," Wolfe said. "Some learn by policy. Others by embarrassment. Dinner restored the house's religion. The soup was leek and potato. The sandwich did its duty. Beer foamed correctly. Wolfe's chair reclaimed its man the way a shell claims its crab. I cleared the cups from the side table, though there were none, because habit had developed nerves. The ring in the frame caught the lamp and made a small, indecent halo. Wolfe glanced at it once more before letting his eyes close. "A stain," he said, "is an instrument. As with letters, its use depends on who holds it. Most men attempt to hide them. Better to read them. Better still." And here he lifted the glass and put it down where no paper ever lived, to learn how to avoid making them. "That would be policy," I said. "That would be appetite disciplined," he said, and let the room settle into the right kind of silence, the kind with dinner in it. I took the frame to hang it where our sins are educational and not decorative, down the hall by the closet that holds the umbrellas and the bad weather. On my way back, the doorbell thought about being a cough again and decided it could wait. The brownstone had earned its quiet. Wolfe had his chair. I had my sandwich. The city could file itself until morning. The brownstone doesn't like loose ends. They scratch at the air and disturb the order Wolfe builds out of routine. That evening, once the house had eaten, drunk, and reminded itself that civilization is a matter of timing, Wolfe decided to put the matter away like a book returned to its shelf. He sat deep in his chair, fingertips steepled, eyes half closed. I was in my proper place with a notebook I wasn't using because the case didn't need further record. Just punctuation. "The sequence," he said, "was obvious once the letters were treated as multiple, not singular. Mr. Vance wrote an original by hand, which Miss Pell removed under the guise of protecting the foundation. Miss Dwyer typed a clean draft, which lingered until he hesitated. Mr. Heron preserved the original under legal hold, not to disclose, but to control. Miss Vance and Mr. Malloy, impelled by impatience with concealment, added mischief. Rings, scans, ghosts slid under doors. Each pursued a different idol: tidiness, law, righteousness, conscience, or art. The idols clashed, and the letter became theater and the coffee, I said, because it had been the hinge from the start. The coffee, Wolfe said, was not mischief. It was negligence, and negligence is as damning as malice when it signals possession. Mr. Heron's paralegal, entrusted with inspection, left the droplet that betrayed the handoff. Thus we knew the letter had passed into a firm's custody, not been spirited by phantoms. From there, the rest followed with the inevitability of sauce on a tie. I let him have that one. Fritz had collected the tray and the new blotter, so no saucers or rings would test the metaphor tonight. What matters, Wolfe went on, is that Mr. Vance has discharged both obligation and position. Miss Pell confessed. Miss Ives received redress. Miss Dwyer has learned caution. Mr. Malloy and Miss Vance have lost their appetite for dramatics, and counsel has been reminded that law is not ownership. This house, his glance flicked to the framed blotter on the wall, the faint planet ring dried into permanence, retains a lesson. A stain, Mr. Goodwin, is never erased by denial. It is only redeemed by being read, which, I said, puts us in the publishing business. He grunted, the way he does when my wit pleases him against his will. Bah! We are in the business of appetite, sir, reading it, curbing it, or satisfying it, depending on the hour, the orchids upstairs murmured to themselves. Outside, the city filed its noises in cabinets we don't own. Inside, dinner was done. The blotter was new, and Wolfe had returned the brownstone to its correct geometry, himself immovable, the rest of us orbiting, order restored. I closed my notebook and called it a day. Cases like this don't end with gunfire or handcuffs. They end with truth placed precisely where it belongs, and with Wolfe in his chair, reminding the world that intellect, properly fed, leaves no room for stains, 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 for stains.